For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Brevi on our weekly flagship show, The Talking Point. Today we're looking at the G20 Foreign Ministerial meet in Bali. Our experts today, Dr. Pooja Bhatt, who's an independent scholar, and she's also written the book, and it's in fact her PhD thesis as well, The 9-Line. Pooja, good to see you again on StratNews.
Thank you, Amitabh. Thank you for having me for the show.
And joining us for the first time from the Philippines capital, Manila, is Don McGill. I beg your pardon, Don McLain. Gill. Apologies for that,
Thank you so much
Don.
for having me. Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
As we go on down the show, I'll get it right.
No worries.
Don, just looking at what we know of the G20 meeting, the actual meetings were, of course, closed door. Sergei Lavrov reportedly walked out when the German foreign minister was criticizing the invasion of Ukraine. He wasn't there for Secretary Blinken's speech or the Ukrainian foreign minister Kuleba's statements. I'm not sure if the reverse happened when he spoke, but with this sharp divide in the G20, what really can the organization hope to achieve?
Well, that is a very good question, and thank you for that particular question. Now, we understand that the unfolding situation in Eastern Europe continues to impact the supply and prices of food and energy resources, at a time when the world is barely bouncing back from the pandemic. And Indonesia's leadership, I think we have to shed some light on this, for this particular leader, a very critical period, given other structural security issues as well. We can see that Indonesia has indeed attempted to maximize its utility and objectivity and pragmatism when perceptions in the public sphere are divided. So as many of us are aware, the Indonesian foreign minister has rightfully highlighted that it's a responsibility to end the war soon, but by prioritizing, of course, the negotiating table rather than the battlefield. Now, this, I think, is very prominent, given, of course, the wide array of activities being done from all sides of the camp towards the situation. There are different approaches, and this is, I think, a very objective lens that Indonesia has brought forward in the G20 that really needs to be dissected.
Sure. Pooja, India, I would think, apart from, of course, the hosts and some other developing countries, are the only ones who can and have talked to everyone in the G20 summit. Your comments on that, and if you can also take a question that's coming from a viewer, PP, Dr. Bhatt, who says, is G20 just a talking shop of member countries, or does it have any tangible achievements so far in global politics?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think you were correct to mention that India is one of the only countries which could manage to, talk with all the countries on the sidelines. I think just some time back, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar actually had meetings for most of all the foreign ministers attending the Bali conference there. So I think India holds that kind of key right now where, despite having its own differences on a bilateral issue with some of the countries, it is going ahead and meeting, the leaders of those countries and trying to make it work. Maybe it's on sidelines, but as effective as it can be. At the same time, about the G20, yes, G20 has been condemned before also for being slow and, not being reformist enough and not being quick enough. But that is about multilateralism. Multilateralism is meant to work in a structured way, or anything structured takes time. What is commendable about any multilateral organization, especially in these difficult times, is to sustain the conversations when everything else is breaking down. And this is the time we need multilateralism the most. And therefore, we need countries such as Indonesia and India, which have this kind of capacity of bringing countries together. Remember, in 1950s, I think India and Indonesia were the countries which started the NAM conversations, when world was, again, divisive between the two polar regions. And then this Annam conversation now is continuing, and we have been seeing different forms of it. And I think this is this moment, I think India is trying to take on that kind of responsibility again, and seeing, despite these sharp divisions between the Western-led world and China and Russia on the other hand, bringing all these countries together because of the more pressing issues such as climate change, sustainable growth and development, and even the economy, which is taken us which has plummeted because of COVID-19 and other Ukraine crisis. I think these issues, bringing these issues on the table, are more important than having bilateral differences at the moment. So I think G20 is very crucial at the moment, at least in times like these. And with India's presidency coming next year, I think it will only be sharpened enough.
Sure. Don, we'll talk about global issues that impact everybody, but just talking about bilateral ones for the moment, in terms of whether multilateral organizations like the G20 actually give the opportunity for engagement of this kind when what's happening with India and China. So I just wanted to get your reading on the India-China Foreign Ministerial meeting on the sidelines, Don.
Right, thank you. And I think it needs to be emphasized more than it has been, particularly because of its significant importance. We have and Jaishankar with his meeting with Wang Yi really emphasized on observing, the three mutuals. So that's a mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and of course there was a reaffirming of importance, the importance of fully abiding by bilateral agreements and protocols that have been established in the past. So this is very important. Many may ask, many may look at it as just one separate occasion where two foreign ministers meet. But really, this is an attempt to bring back a more complete discussion towards a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific and not only in Europe. While there have been several strong actions against Russia's disregard for Ukraine's territorial integrity towards its sovereignty, the West has been quite tolerant and even accommodating in their approach towards China, despite its constant provocations along the LAC, and of course India's territorial integrity and the sovereign rights of several countries in the Indo-Pacific. So these are the things that Dr. Jaishankar has really emphasized with the meaning that this is not just a talk shop for one particular issue, but really a framework to uphold a rules-based order throughout the globe. And I think that this should be looked at from a very comprehensive point. The fact that the United States would not be willing to hold negotiations, but willing to hold as recently mentioned as a significant security threat, and of course with China trying to look for an alternative with its global security initiative, we could see that the ambitions are clearly emphasized, but really there is quite of a double standard in terms of addressing who to negotiate with or not. So I think that this must be looked into, a balanced approach in understanding the rules-based order, not only through Europe's lens, but also in the Indo-Pacific is crucial. And that is what I could take from the ministerial bilateral meeting between Dr. Jaishankar and Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
Pooja, the standoff India and China continues, and it's very evident the two countries' positions on that from the two different readouts that came off that meeting on the sidelines.
Yeah, so basically we are having the same stalemate about different positions. China is not ready to budge. And India is, on this other hand, being very persistent about its own approach, that till the time we have certain, back off from Chinese, and we will not be continuing with the talk. I think that is we have learned to play by the playbook now. What China has been doing for over the years, slicing it, the regions and territories of the different countries, I think we have learned not to take it anymore and make it a global issue. So I think it's a very important point for holding conversation, because the moment you secede to any of those demands that China is making, any kind of negotiation goes out of the table. So I think that is a very crucial step that India has been doing at the moment with its statements and its readouts, that making it clear that till the China comes on the table with a similar agenda, and the conversations further cannot move in a fruitful manner. Is that what my takeaway from the readouts are?
Sure. The ministry here, Don, I'm not sure how closely you're following it, but responded during the weekly briefing to reports saying that India, when it takes over the presidency of the G20, would have meetings in Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh, saying there's no need for speculation, but also keeping the report alive in the sense by saying that there will be meetings all over the country when that happens. Pakistan's issued statements, China has issued statements against that. Do you see India signaling anything by these reports, even though they are not officially confirmed as of now?
Right, thank you. And there are two answers to that particular question. One point, especially with the response of the MEA, is that it's important not to sensationalize particular areas at this particular point in time. We have to understand that the occasion would be spread out across India. And the need to really look at it pragmatically is necessary to avoid, as I just said, sensationalization. The second point, of course, is that India is free to hold particular events within its territory, and the two union territories are well within India's sovereignty. So this is something that needs to be respected as well. I think this is the point in time where India is of material capability, but also and it's normal. So we are looking into a more confident, of course, and a more proactive India, willing really to emphasize on the maintenance, the security of its borders, and really not bow down to those who wish to change the status quo in terms of assertive or manipulative measures. As we can see, India is perhaps situated in the most complicated geopolitical neighborhood, sandwiched between two nuclear powers that are seeking to, of course, nibble on its territory. And of course, there are other non-traditional security issues as well. So given these particular predicaments, and of course, the haphazard responses of the West, for example, sometimes addressing it, sometimes being accommodating to China, India would have to address these situations on its own. It is aware of that. And this is something that is a step towards the right direction, is really to, human agency is very important, to really harness your capacity to acknowledge that capacity and to acknowledge your geography in order to provide proactive external policies. So we are going towards that realization, that acknowledgement, and it is very important for us to safeguard our territorial integrity at a time of great tumultuous efforts.
Sure. Pooja, not just the locations, even though, as Don says, we don't want to sensationalize, it's speculative as of now since it's not been officially announced. But coincidentally or not, the Dalai Lama's birthday, the Prime Minister's wishes, other engagements by Indian leaders, whether it's the State Chief Minister or the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, and action by the Enforcement Directorate against Vivo. I mean, whether they're coincidental or not, do you see any conscious signaling from India towards China?
I think I see it this way. So what we are trying to do is compartmentalize our issues with China. Where it is security related, we are talking in a bilateral level. We are doing it bilateral level, and where issues are larger than our own territories and issues are transnational in nature, I think we are taking more of a multilateral side. And I think this is only helpful not to complicate, because the moment you do vice versa, take bilateral in a multilateral format or bring a multilateralism into a bilateral format, we have always seen some kind of protracted, discussions going on with no end. So I think it's a very wise move to do that. And yes, it might seem very simultaneous that these events are happening. I think previous prime ministers and Indian leadership has all previously, wished Dalai Lama on his birthday. So I don't think it's the very first time. But continuously doing it just affirms that India has its own place in the global politics, and they are taking their own decisions, and they're not afraid of what China would say. Earlier there used to be this hesitancy in the leadership that if we might take certain kind of step and we might get some international repercussions from Chinese statements. I think that fear is no longer there, and I think that is the reason we are taking more overt and aggressive foreign policy, both on the bilateral and multilateral issues in terms of China.
Sure. Don, just on the G20 itself now, I know we've touched upon it earlier, but explain its relevance to a normal person who's not, in the strategic community in these times, global food, energy, financial crisis, which has been exacerbated, of course, by the war in Ukraine. In terms of actual outcomes, and I'm just going to take another question, which kind of dovetails into what I'm asking you. PP says, what real impact do G20 member meetings have on global politics and the global economy, other than leaders just stating their own positions on various issues?
We need to dissect this further. If we look into the initiation of the G20, we have to understand that it was initially perceived from an economic standpoint, but especially as security issues have begun to overlap. So we have the overlap of traditional and non-traditional security issues, which really encompass anything and everything. That's another conceptual problem with that. But because of this particular overlap, we are looking into a wide array of issues that are being discussed in this particular platform. And while they are emerging and robust economies that are present in the G20, talks are also being made towards those that are middle or low income countries as well. So this is something that is expected to be more wholesome in its approach, more inclusive, in order to set the framework further for activities throughout the world. However, the problem with this, and I understand the criticism towards the G20, is because there is that fear that the G20 may continue to stretch until it becomes, to that point where it's just a basket of everything, and it loses its particular focus, it loses its particular relevance. So there's that particular issue that the next president, the next chair India would have to also face. But of course, given the external constraints, it is important, of course, to look into these particular fora as a significant platform to discuss and to maintain inclusivity of the member states of the international system. Similar things have been said about ASEAN, about the ARF, for example, the ASEAN Regional Forum, that it is merely a talk shop. But really, agenda setting at the normative level also plays a significant role. And as we can see, it's not only about hard power, which the combination of both hard and soft power, which is really making its debut in this time of day. So to really maximize these particular institutions is necessary. We've seen a disregard by former President Trump towards these international institutions and fora. And China was able to leverage its position by filling the vacuum and by establishing its legitimacy and its leadership in the international system. So these are the type of gaps that you wish to avoid in order to maintain the sanctity of the rules-based order and to maintain the democratic level of engagement. And it would be on the shoulders of countries that see to it in a balanced approach, such as Indonesia, such as India, who understand, of course, the objectivity of state interest and, of course, the heterogeneity of the international system.
Pooja, Russia and Ukraine, now Indonesia played that or tried to navigate that divide very finely post the G7. President Widodo went to both Moscow and Kyiv to invite both the presidents for the G20 Summit. How do you see the foreign ministerial meet? I mean, as a precursor to the summit, if the war continues, what will the G20 be in November, say, if the presidents of both Ukraine and Russia actually join in?
Yeah, so looking by what's going to happen in November, when there's a summit meeting, I think this is the groundwork being prepared at the moment by the foreign ministerial meet. And this is crucial for the success of the summit. So if Indonesia was able to bring these countries together, there are more or less chances that these countries will be together, will be on the summit which is happening in November before Indonesia hands over to India. Having said that, the situation of war will definitely make a mark on how countries will, showcase their behavior during the summit time. As you see, we had some walkout this time, when certain speakers were speaking and other countries walked out. There are a good amount of chance that this might repeat in the summit meeting in November. However, bringing these countries together on the same table is very important. I think Indonesia will try its level best to do that for the coming months.
Don, how do you see India's role when she takes over the presidency, especially if the war in Ukraine doesn't end by then?
Right. India's presidency in the G20 comes at a very interesting time. If we look into the troika of the G20, which is the past, the present, the future presidents, there will be three developing countries in particular: Indonesia, India, and Brazil. This is significant given the need, of course, to restructure the global political economic narrative and the direction from an angle of developing economies. India's leadership in international fora is not new. And it has been taking an objective and proactive role, of course, in chairing these institutions in the past as well. India must continue to ensure a balanced approach in dealing with the world's political, economic, and security issues, given, of course, there is no uniform national interest, and the need to balance these things and at the same time to adhere to the established order is necessary to be able to maximize the outputs of these particular fora. So there must be also a continued effort to focus on sustainable development, to focus on digitalization and other similar areas, of course, and the need to really follow suit. Indonesia has done a remarkable job as the leader of the G20 for this year, and I believe that there would be challenges, definitely, given, of course, the unfolding situation in Eastern Europe, and of course the other situations happening in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. So there will always be challenges that India will face, and it would have to take up these particular challenges in a very proactive way with leadership. But based on India's its growing material capabilities, the significance of its diplomatic network, as I talked about earlier, this chairmanship that it will be heading will most likely witness positive results. We do not want to create some sort of fortune telling here, but based on the track record, based on the data that we are in we can see that India, as it continues to rise, will provide that objectivity of leadership that the world will need in the future.
Pooja, your comments on India's presidency at this crucial time?
Yeah, I would very much.
A lot of investment, Harshvardhan Singla, former foreign secretary, is in charge. Amitabh Kant, former Niti Aayog chairperson, has been made Sherpa.
Yeah. So yes, I would agree a lot with what Don just mentioned about India's position as agenda sitting, which is very important at the moment. And then, in a grouping G20, which comprises both developing and underdeveloped and underdeveloped and developing nations, I think this is very, very important for India to take the agenda setting from the global South countries which are there. So at this moment, India's presidency will be very tricky, but having taken a leaf from how India conducted its BRICS virtual summit, where everyone was maybe trying to coax India not to participate, and given the Galwan crisis, I think India took a very pragmatic decision of going ahead and attending that summit. So it shows India's commitment to the multilateralism. I think that will continue for the G20. As you can see, we have a proper new G20 secretariat being formed, headed by former Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla, and now we have Amitabh Kant as the Sherpa for the coming meeting. So I think India is making a lot of investments in terms of making it a success. And I think a lot of agenda setting is already on the works at the moment. So I think all in all, India would try to have a very successful presidency and bring about all the important issues for discussions, whether it's the sustainable growth and development, whether it's climate change. Of course, economy is the major touching point for all the countries right now. I think these issues are transnational, which should not be derailed by any, power politics or a bilateral issue of any two countries. And I think India will keep that larger picture in mind while considering its presidency throughout the 2023.
Sure. Don, how does Southeast Asia, or if you want to talk about the Philippines in particular, see China? On one hand, every country in that region has had issues on sovereignty, maritime sovereignty, Chinese aggression. On the other, they don't really want to be caught between two confrontational camps, the US and China.
Right. In terms of the Philippines, and if you look into Southeast Asia as a whole, we can see that there is a very sensitive positioning in terms of dealing with China. We have to understand, of course, the role of geopolitics here, and which means that these countries, Southeast Asian countries, will have to engage with China. Cutting it off is not an option, mainly because China is the largest and most capable neighbor that they have. So this is something that is, I think, sensationalized if we say that we have to cut them off, etc. That is not the ideal situation, and the need to engage with them to maintain stable relations is necessary. However, this does not mean that countries like the Philippines cannot or will not stand up to China's assertiveness when it comes to the territorial integrity and sovereign rights, particularly in the West Philippine Sea. So we are looking into diversification of partners. We can see that India and the Philippines have reinvigorated their bilateral strategic partnership since 2016. And we can see that there are similar efforts made as well. The modernization of the military, these are all things that are being done in order to maintain proactivity, given, of course, the tumultuous situation in the neighborhood. However, the need to still constantly open lines of communication with China to ensure that there are efficient lines of communication in terms of particular issues or clashes in the disputed areas would also be necessary. So the need to really be proactive, as I've had the honor of coining the term proactive autonomy, which is basically adhering to the principles of the alliance with the US, but not being defined by it in terms of its overall bilateral relationship. So the need to really be balanced, objective, will be necessary for Southeast Asian states, given, of course, the tumultuous situation happening in Southeast Asia.
Don, since you're on the subject, if you want to just take this as well from Abhik Mahato, who says, do East Asian countries like the Philippines understand the foreign pressures acting on India in the context of current issues going on here? Is the new president of Philippines, Bongbong Marcos, pro-China?
So I think it would be very simplistic to say whether it's pro or anti. But first, regarding the situation with India, the Philippines has significantly looked up to India's positions in recently as well. India's position in Ukraine. These are the things that the Philippines has also mirrored in terms of acting on a balanced and active approach. But towards China, we can still see that there would be the maintenance of positive relations, such as that with President Duterte. We could look for that level of continuity. But at the same time, President Marcos has also emphasized that he would underscore the relevance of the alliance with the United States with every level of its bilateral engagement or multilateral engagement. And at the same time, President Marcos, Bongbong Marcos, has also emphasized that he is willing to deepen bilaterals with countries. In fact, with his meeting with the Indian ambassador, and I think you've had the pleasure of meeting him, they had very good conversations, very proactive conversations to take the bilateral relationship forward. So we are looking into a Philippines that seeks to maintain its position as a key player in the Indo-Pacific by not limiting its options and at the same time engaging with those that have mutual interests as its.
Pooja, India has been widening and deepening its relations with countries in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, Philippines. Since we're talking about, we had a show when we talked to you about the BrahMos deal. Indonesia is a strategic partner as well. Vietnam, we had a good visit by the defense minister. If you want to just elaborate a little bit on India's relations with the Southeast Asian nations, Pooja.
Yeah, that's a good question actually. So there is a growing understanding that India has to take this, a more visible and more responsible position within the Indo-Pacific. Having said, because India is a resident Indo-Pacific power, so it's very necessary for any of the resident Indo-Pacific countries to have good relationship with each other. And I think, apart from the framework that India has been, partners with these countries in a multilateral format, it is crucial for India to have its good bilateral relations with these countries. We have been having ACTs since 1990s, which had led to very, very minuscule results, and that has been, revived under Prime Minister Modi as ACTs. So I think there is, and now we've been looking for newer avenues of cooperation with these East Asian countries and Southeast Asian countries. Where the touchy points for all these countries is security. More and more awareness that each country is on its own when it's come to their own security issues. And having said that, also they are developing economies. For them, it is not very much possible to have very expensive agreements and defense deals and purchases from other countries. India steps in that vacuum. So India is ready to provide whatever indigenous, technologies it has, and it is ready to sell those countries which require them for their immediate security needs. I think this is the kind of, gap filling that these countries are doing for each other and building better relationship. There are other avenues of cooperation that India is, of course, working with each of these countries in Southeast Asia. However, one of the, taller points right now is the security, and that's why we are seeing more and more deepening and widening of these security tie-ups, engagement, the training, the exercises that we are seeing, the sale of the defense equipments we are seeing. So these are all under that larger umbrella of engaging these countries together for their own security network.
Just on what you're talking, there's a conversation going on in the live chat box. I think I'll just put up also Jaydeep Kadavi, who says the Tejas MK1 is one of the preferred options at the Malaysian air show at Langkawi. I think he's talking about 2019, and there have been reports in both the Indian media and the Malaysian media, though nothing official about the LCA there. And Abhik had a follow-up saying, would the Philippines be interested in procuring Indian defense systems further since the BrahMos deal in the context of recent regime change and elections? And I do know that both sides are interested in other platforms. So just a quick note from the viewers, but I just got to take some questions from them for you, Don. Matara asks, what's the general view about India among the non-West G20 countries? And I presume here we can only answer about the Southeast Asian ones, I guess, not Africa and South America. Is the media in these countries as anti-India and agenda-driven as the Western media broadcaster? And Ojgod Chelik, who disagrees with us, saying Western media doesn't have an anti-Indian agenda. Where did you get that from? But you get the general drift, Don.
Right. So thank you. These are very, important questions as well. If you look into the perception of Southeast Asia towards India, going beyond the G20, let's talk about Southeast Asia in general. There is a significantly positive perception towards India. And I think that more and more countries in the region or the sub-region are looking towards India as a security provider. The BrahMos deal was basically a step into the right direction. There are also other defense deals that are in the works, in the pipeline. We are also looking into other strategic engagements with Malaysia, with Indonesia, and of course, particularly Vietnam. These are the areas that are significantly improving in terms of India's image. So, I've made this argument before that India's presence in the Southeast Asian region is not merely, we can't just box it in as a way to counter China. I think that would be doing injustice to India as an emerging great power, that its only interest would be the power competition. While it is an important part, India's interest would also be to provide and to showcase itself as a responsible stakeholder in peace, a developmental partner, and of course a defense partner as well. So we can see that there is an increasing interest among these states towards India, and allowing India to play a more proactive role in terms of being a security provider in the region. This is, of course, despite the fact that China has this sort of de facto regional exclusion policy that it only seeks to have, particularly its sphere of influence in the region. But of course, we can see that India has been pushing its way proactively, positively, without any intentions of altering the status quo in the region. And this is very important, this particular point, is that India's presence is not to alter the status quo, but mainly to maintain the status quo and to engage with these states based on mutually agreed upon interests and concerns.
One question from Kurt Cobain. We have touched upon this, Dr. Bhatt, Pooja, who says, is plurilateralism the way forward given the struggle multilateralism is facing? Could India manage to serve its interests with that?
Okay. It's conceptually, I do not see much difference between plurilateralism and multilateralism, because in the end, whenever you engage more than two countries, it's absolutely becomes plurilateral. So conceptually, we don't see much, but yes, countries will, like India and other countries in the region, you see, they're not siding with one kind of normatic and conceptual and value-based order. So they're trying to have engagement with everything based upon their own interests. Yes, plurilateralism is the future, but it will be only in multilateralism. So larger umbrella of multilateralism is how I see it.
Right. Sorry for that. Excuse me, Dr. Pooja Bhatt and Don McLain Gill. Thank you so much for sharing your views with us here, your perspectives. There's still a debate going on the live chat box, and I've taken some of those questions, but we'll have both of you again to answer the viewers and our questions. Thanks again to both of you.
Thank you, Mitab. Thank you for having me.
So much.
Pleasure's all ours, Don and Pooja. And just a reminder to our viewers, there's a link in the YouTube descriptor if you want to help support us financially. We also put up that UPI ID, which you can just scan using a QR code. And as soon as this stream ends, YouTube has a new feature, relatively new feature, which is called Super Thanks, that will appear as an icon, a heart-shaped icon right next to the thumbs up that we hope you will give this video. Do share the link with all your personal and professional friends and colleagues as well. This is the Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Rivi.